There's this thing that our brain does for survival, and it's called suppression. Because of suppression and the strong influences of society, a lot of us transsexual women don't know who we are. We don't confront it. We're not able to manage those feelings, those overwhelming, things in our life that we would have to tackle to understand ourselves. We aren't able to get there quickly. So it took me, 30 years to come out and start coming to grips with who I was and to start doing a transition. And for some of us, it'll go into our 40s or 60s or 70s. And it has no limit. And some of us will come out a lot younger. But to say that transsexuals have no doubts about who they are and, their roles in life would be incorrect. And I wanted to disabuse that false notion. I've been told by transsexuals that if you are really a woman, that you have no doubts. I've had plenty of doubts, from the beginning of my transition to even now, although the doubts that I have now are far less and of a much smaller magnitude, and almost gone at this point of being 2 years, through and in a transition. But let me explain. I had doubts of whether a transition was correct for me, even though I felt feminine and like a woman, and I felt like it matched, and I was dysphoric towards women and wished I had what they had for the majority of my life, almost the entirety of my life. I still had doubts of whether a transition would be correct for my life, and even whether if I could handle it, at one point. So, but the way I dealt with those doubts is I began to do a slow transition and plucked my eyebrows to look more feminine. I let my hair grow out and I got my ears pierced. What I've noticed, and this was the best way to alleviate my doubts, the further I got into transition, the better I felt about myself. The higher my self-esteem was going, I was just feeling so much more comfortable in my skin. And I felt so much better about how people viewed me and how people interacted with me that I began to feel more comfortable in my skin. And that is what I used as a gauge to transition and to alleviate my doubts, because it did. The men would not ever feel comfortable with breasts on their chest. Thus, that is why female to males remove their breasts. So, so here, if I was really a man, then me having these boobs, I wouldn't be able to handle them. I'd have to get them off my body. But I don't feel that way. I feel really good about my breasts, and I feel good about my earrings. I feel good about my long hair. I feel good about people calling me ma'am, when it was always the opposite before. So it's this slow process for us transsexuals to come to terms with who we are, to alleviate our doubts, and to come into our own, whether it be being a man or being a woman, going into my womanhood. It takes a while. Do we always know who we are? No, not necessarily. Do we have and suffer doubts? Yes, we do. Can we overcome those doubts? Irrefutably, yes. And is being transsexual and transgender confusing? Irrefutably, the answer to that one, and very clearly spoken, absolutely yes.
Okay, I love that Kaylee started off her video about transsexual doubts talking about suppression. That rings a lot of truth for me. I relate to a lot of what Kaylee said in her video. I definitely had doubts about whether I was trans, whether I was really a man, and I think lots of it was initially rooted in suppression of my true gender. And when I first started exploring the possibility that I was trans and not female but male, I struggled so much. I put this pressure on myself that I thought I needed to have known that I was a guy from the time I was like 2 or 3 years old, and I just thought that that's the only way that I could legitimately be a guy, is if I had known when I was a toddler, or most certainly before I was 23, 24 years old, through being able to like watch YouTube videos and stuff, I realized that that just wasn't true in the slightest. But I think that a huge part of the reason why there's a lot of people who don't recognize their true gender until later in life is due to suppression. And I recognize that, like, gender can be fluid, and maybe not everybody feels the same gender when they're a kid as they do when they're an adult, and that can happen without suppression. But I do feel like suppression plays such a huge role in our doubts. We're doubting ourselves, but we know ourselves. Like Kaylee shared in her video, my doubts didn't stop as soon as I started transitioning. I was also told by lots of people before transition, like, you need to know 100%, because it's a irreversible thing, you know, parts of it anyway. I did feel as close to that as possible. You know, I had gotten to the point where there was no other option in my life but to transition, because I couldn't keep living the way that I was, but there still have been doubts embedded in me, and there still are times now where I doubt myself. I think now the doubts I have, they're more hypothetical. Sometimes I still think about, like, why I couldn't have just lived as a masculine woman and maybe had top surgery but not taken testosterone, and not lived in society as male, but just present masculine and maybe have a flat chest but still be a girl. I still just wonder, like, why I couldn't do that, and sometimes that brings up doubts in me, because I'm just like, why wasn't I able to do that, and could I have done that? What if I had tried that route? Like, what if I tried harder to find boy clothes that were built for my body type pre-testosterone? What if I got top surgery? Like, would that have been enough? And ultimately, I think not, for similar reasons to what Kaylee was saying. Like, the further she gets along in her transition and recognizes things about the way she feels with breasts or with long hair or earrings, and, you know, stereotypical feminine or masculine things that, like, for me would be that I removed my breasts and it feels awesome, that I see fat redistribution and that makes me feel so much more at home in my body. And when I notice myself gaining fat around my hips instead of in my stomach or something, and it makes me look like I have more curves, I get incredibly uncomfortable with myself, and I really enjoy having a lower voice, and I would love it for it to be 1,000 times deeper. All these things that affirm that this is correct for me, and the fact that I'm pretty happy today. Like, I'm not depressed every day. I'm not hiding away in my bedroom. I'm able to walk around this world and engage in it, whereas prior to transition, I was in my room all the time. I couldn't face the world many days. I was completely consumed with the fact that my physicalness was not correct, and the fact that that has been erased, and when it does come up, it's about feminine attributes. I have no doubts. I know that this is right for me. I'm not going to deny the fact that there have been doubts, and sometimes there still are. Also, though, like, pay attention to your doubts. You got to sort through that stuff in order to realize, like, what is right, and, like, taking baby steps and seeing what feels right, not just saying, oh, well, I have some doubts, but they must not be valid, so I'm just gonna transition anyway. Like, no, you need to really explore what those doubts are all about and recognize what's gonna ease your mind and improve your life in the long term. Alright, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Let's go out back and plan a family.